nTask and getting things done. Is it a good combo or is it a flop? That's what we'll find out in this video. Let's get started by configuring our settings. On the left bottom corner, you can click on your avatar and press Profile Settings. Nothing too special here. You can enter your name, job title, and company industry. And this already hints at the fact that this is a tool made for collaborative use, similar to Asana, Trello, and ClickUp, for example. So we will have to do some reinterpreting here, but that's okay. We've done it before, and you'll see that nTask can work as an individual GTD system as well. Under Account Preferences, more basic settings, including a dark sidebar mode, which doesn't change anything for me. The sidebar is dark either way. That's okay because it's what I want, but if you want a light sidebar, I hope this does work for you. Notification preferences are quite extensive actually. Issues, however, and risks are a specific type of item in this software that we will not use those, so you might as well turn those off, and it's easy to do. Under the items that don't have an inline, you can basically treat those as a category and you can see all of them go on or off at the same time. Further settings can be found under sign-in and security, nothing special here, and apps and integrations could be useful for you, especially the calendar ones if you have some time-bound tasks, want to make some connections there. Zapier, of course, it's nice that it's there, although usually in my experience it's more like digital duct tape. However, it could enrich your nTask experience, but we won't be looking into that in this tutorial. Instead, we'll focus in on this app as a standalone solution for your GTD setup. Let's look at some more settings here. We have a dashboard for Amy the astronaut, who is an individual user of this software, even though it says team. Yet another reinterpretation going on here. And within this dashboard, we have two workspaces, one named GTD and one named reference. You can go ahead and duplicate that. You can press create new workspace. There you can enter your name and you can even give it a special URL if you want to. And after you do that, you can move on to the first one that's named GTD. Once you click on a workspace, you'll first be taken to the task view, but we'll actually want to click on the workspace on the left sidebar again and go to Workspace Settings. There's not much that you need to change here. You could actually add a specific picture for it if you want to. Under User Management, nothing has to change, and the same is true for roles and permissions, because by default, you're the admin. You have all the access you need. What you do need to change is task status. It boots up a couple of templates, but frankly, you can ignore those. What you'll need to do is create these statuses here. Unprocessed, next, in progress, completed, and waiting. I also gave them associated colors, and how we use those becomes apparent shortly. What you'll also want to do is make sure that unprocessed has the initial status. This means that by default, any new task entered into the system has this status. And of course, completed is the final stage. Next up, go to the sidebar again and press Customize Menu at the bottom. What you'll want to make sure is that projects, boards, and meetings are shown, but timesheets, issues, and risks are hidden from view. And you can do that by pressing on the eye. Almost done here with the settings. Next up, go to Tasks on the left-hand sidebar, and then go all the way to the right and press the plus symbol here. This allows us to customize the fields that we see here in the columns view. This is how I've set it up. ID is hidden, status and projects are activated, planned start and actual start are hidden, context, energy, and priority are activated. Context and energy, though, are custom fields that I've created, and I'll show you where you can set those up shortly. Assignee up to time logged is hidden, attachments are shown, and then the rest is hidden. Play around with this, see what works for you, but in my opinion, this makes the most sense from a GTD perspective. Next up, how do we actually set up these context and energy fields, and how do we fill those with a value? For that, let's go to a task. Here I already have one, but I can also add a new one. That brings us to capturing in general, capturing new input, emptying our head basically. We press the green button, just enter my task, and for project I select inbox, which is a list that I've created, and we'll go through all the lists in a moment. We can change some more here, including the status. If you remember, this is what we already set up. For now, this is an unprocessed item because it goes into the inbox. We don't want to think about this, and because this is the initial status, we don't have to think about this. So we just create task. Now we can click on the task, and we can navigate to this section here. It says GTD. and we select plus, and from there we can change the context. I've created 3 for Amy the astronaut here, and also 3 energy levels. Now, how does this work? What you can do is go to add/edit fields. From here, you can create a drop-down list. Then you just give it the name. I did that with context, and here you enter your various contexts. You can add them to a section, which I also created. I called it GTD. Field layout is full width. Doesn't really matter which one you select as long as it's visible. And you add this field to this workspace. The reference workspace won't need this. And then you create field. I'll press cancel because I already did. And you can do the same exercise for energy. And the cool thing is that any edits you make to the existing fields that you've created, such as context, will be carried over to any other task that's already made in the past. So feel free to just edit and update your context, which is what you'll need to do anyway when you have a new one or ditch an old one. Speaking of the inbox we just looked at, navigate to projects, and there you can create your lists. I created inbox, standalone items, 2 fictional projects, and I numbered them. And here I also did 2A to B to C, so that what we can do is actually sort them by title and have a neat overview instead of it all being juggled in a weird way that doesn't make sense for us. Agendas, some they may be goals and higher horizons. Now the inbox is of course the list where you want new items to end up in, hence we created it as such. When you add a new task, all you have to do is select that project. You can search for inbox, and there you go. It is in there once you select it. You will also want to press plus here, just like we did with the tasks view. And in this case, I recommend only showing tasks, which is the number of tasks associated with that list, as well as progress. This will be useful for things like goals or individual projects because it bases it on the completion status of the associated tasks. Helpful to see, I think, but all these other things like risks, issues, those are taxonomies we will not be using in the system anyway, so there's no point of showing them as well. Let's now clarify these 2 items that we've got in our inbox. First, new inbox item, we press it, and we can change the title. Let's imagine that Amy the astronaut has to check the wings on the rocket. So we do check wings as the name. We change the project to one that we already have, which could be get rocket ready for launch. We can hover in there, you see the full name. Priority can be updated, planned start, planned end date, actual start and end date as well. Whether you use those is up to you. Description for further elaboration, although comments also serve that purpose. Probably these are more here for teams that work together and want to comment on each other. Under GTD, we assign the context. In this case, it is rocket and high energy. We can estimate the time at the top right side here by clicking the time here, pressing estimated time, and there we can select it down to the minute. Let's say this takes us 25 minutes. We can enter and save that. However, we could even measure the actual time it takes us by pressing play, then moving on to do our task and pressing stop when we're done. Now I press stop here before 1 minute. They require us to make at least 1 minute of effort, so it won't be counted. However, if you were to do that, you can navigate to the activity log and it would all be registered in here. So it's nice to see that this level of detail is available if you need it, if you want to look back and check for any task. We want to make sure that the status of the task is also changed because it's no longer unprocessed. This is a next action, is an action we can do right now. Let's make the status reflect that. We press exit, and there we go. 1 item less. Let's now look at this one and pretend that it's a routine item. Maybe it is to check computer for viruses. Why not? This is a standalone action, so we select the project. It is high priority because you don't want any sensitive information to leak. And it is something we want to do repeatedly. It's a routine. That's where we can use this. Repeat task. Let's say we want to do this every week. We can select it down to the day. We can also select multiple days. So it's nice to have this level of flexibility here. Let's do this every Friday at 6 p.m. stop by a certain date. We can go very far in the future, for example. Let's do until November. Or we can select after a certain number of instances. Maybe 500. That's 500 weeks. That's almost 10 years, I think. That should be enough for now. We select repeat task. There we go. This will make it show up once we've marked it complete again. Of course, status will be next. Context, of course. So laptop and medium. We'll select that. There we go. We have an empty inbox. Let's now learn how we can actually work from context, which is important. We want a good overview of what we can do when we're in that particular context. And this is a mess. This is an overview of all kinds of things, including the inbox, someday maybe other higher horizon items. We don't want to see that. Instead, we want to be able to easily select a context like here, click it, and see the tasks that are associated with it. And you can do that with filters as well. This one is set up as follows. The status is next to ensure that is an action we can do now. And the context is laptop. Now you could go more granular here if you want to by also sorting for specific energy levels. That's up to you. It allows you to create all those filters and save them. So make sure you create filters that you're comfortable with. This one is pretty simple. I saved it here and named it laptop. And now we see every item that we can perform now from our laptop, even if they belong to different projects. That all doesn't matter. Coincidentally here, they're all belonging to the same. But you can imagine that this will work. If you have even dozens of projects, just quickly go through the list based on whatever context you're in. Works nicely. We can mark an item complete. And then it will also be removed from this filter, of course, because the filter selects for next. However, the item itself isn't removed. We could still view it from the project file. Speaking of the project file, let's go to projects and look at the project view. Here we have the standalone items list as an example. It might be a bad example, but you can see that you have a different way of looking at tasks from here. Once we click on the project, we can navigate to the tab that says tasks. And as you saw me do, we completed one of these items already, which is why it is on green. It is calculate trajectory to Mars. It's one of 2 items, therefore the completion rate is 50%. Now for this project, that won't actually be relevant. This is a list that you will always have active. However, if we have a specific project like get rocket ready for launch, and we also pretend like one of the items is complete, which we can also do from this view, we can confirm. And then it will also show 50% here. And that makes more sense. What makes less sense from a GTD perspective is things like billable or non-billable. Again, this is aimed at agencies perhaps that are doing certain paid work that they want to register here. Highly unlikely that you'll use this. Resources won't be needed because you just use this yourself. And milestones or financial summary is also something I recommend not using. Although it is actually cool to see what is the total estimated associated time with this project, even though we don't do it for cost estimating, but just analyzing our own time. The board view is actually no different than the project view in that it contains the same things. You can just look at them in a different way. What I did is create boards that coincide with these projects, and I like to sort them ascending A to Z. That's how you have some overview here. You can also add background colors or pictures to them, which is a nice touch. If you create a new board here, it will also create a new project and vice versa. Be mindful of that. These are not 2 different entities. They're just different ways to look at the same thing. Let's again look at the Get Rocket Ready for Launch projects that Amy has. And here you can see in a different way what work has been done based on the status, what work is left to do based on next. So it takes these statuses for the task and applies them to the board. The unfortunate thing is that you cannot change that. However, it's not a big deal either because you have 2 ways of looking at your project, and that should be enough to have a good view of it. From the board view, let's now go to agendas. In other words, communications that you've got planned with people, companies, or specific meetings that you may have. From here, we have Eddie the engineer. Now, never mind the status columns here. You can basically ignore those. Alternatively, you could create a separate workspace with custom statuses associated with that dedicated to agendas if you have a lot of them. For this individual Amy, it's simple enough to not warrant that, but it is an option, so you're not confined to these columns here. However, what we do want to look at is Eddie the Engineer, which is a task under the agendas board/project. From here, what I've done is actually ignore any of the GTD related contexts for tasks and instead navigate it to the meetings tab. From here, you can add a meeting. I've created one here. It says discuss rocket engine. And you can add things to the agenda, specific items, how fast will it go, when will we reach Mars. You can also add follow-up actions and even convert them to a task so that they will actually live in the GTD system out of this agendas list. So that's a pretty cool touch. You can add specific time for the meeting and all that good stuff. This is nice. You can make it repeating as well. One thing you don't want to do is publish. And this to me is a very confusing element of it. Once it's published, it pretends like the meeting has elapsed and any edits won't be possible. I think that's not good, but it is what it is. I accidentally did that here, and you can see there's no way for me to change it. And for a quick overview of your meetings, both ones that you've already had and that have elapsed, you can then navigate to the sidebar item named meetings. So any agenda items can be easily found from here. And with quick access, I created one for agendas. I unfiltered anyone that have the published status. Only unpublished, meaning upcoming, I should say, will be shown here so that you can prepare for your meetings properly. Next up, we have the someday maybe list. Pretty self-explanatory. Any item that isn't actionable now, that you've deferred, or that has to be deferred for reasons beyond your control, doesn't matter. In this case, we have fly to Jupiter. And again, I'll repeat myself. If you want to have custom boards or sections here, you can create separate workspaces dedicated to someday maybe. And I can imagine that some of you might need that if you have a large list with various categories. You can, of course, use custom fields for distinguishing between various someday maybe list items here. You can create a new one, someday maybe category or whatever you want. You have the freedom for that. Board number 5, goals. How do we define them inside of this system? Actually, the board view has no use here, and that is a bit unfortunate and confusing at the same time, because when we go to projects and navigate to goals, we will see something as we added a milestone. This is a different kind of taxonomy. I thought this would be fitting with a goal type of item. So you can add one, let's say, reach Mars by April 30th. Billable, well, it probably is, but let's ignore that for now as we did before. So this is one way you can do it. Of course, you can also add a task with a due date and then interpret the due date of that task as the due date for the goal. That will also make it show up in the board. But I did want to explore these different taxonomies that nTask has to offer here. But I feel like this one is a bit underwhelming. So if you want to have more clearly defined goals, more elaborate ones with sub-goals, you will probably need to use the task taxonomy for that and add that instead of a milestone. For higher horizons, we also added a few tasks defining our purpose, vision, and areas of focus. So one way to do it, we can edit the tasks as well. And from there, we can add a description to indicate whatever it is that we want to define as our respective areas of focus, vision, and goals. So I can navigate to the tasks view as well, uncheck any filter, and we will see those here too. And then if we want to define our areas of focus, we could do that as a checklist, for example. Let's do rocket engineer. And perhaps Amy's also a mother, so that's another role. And those end dates, we can ignore those. In this case, that's not relevant. If you want to ignore those altogether, you can also add a list here instead. With some markup options, they allow you to add a list, and we can just type the same thing. So some freedom here to define whatever your responsibilities are. And then you can save the task, and it will be available to you. Let's look at the workspace dashboard again and look at the final part of the system, which is reference. We can click the reference workspace. And the first thing you'll see under the task view is that it looks a bit different, a bit more bare bones, because we won't need as many as we had with the next actions view. We don't need context, we don't need status, etc. Instead, what you can show is projects and attachments. Now, of course, you can choose to show more, but most of these I think you won't need. However, what you could do is show status and change those under workspace settings, because these settings will be applied to this specific workspace. They won't affect the other one, which means you could select different kinds of information, PDFs, links, images, you name it. However, you could also do that with a custom field. What we could do here is actually add a new section. First, we create the field. We do a drop-down list. And let's do reference type, PDF. Another one could be image. And let's just keep it with that for now. And then we can also use reference type as something to filter for, show or not show. This one doesn't have one yet. We'll actually quickly add one. Let's just pretend this is a PDF. And there we go. Now we can create a filter that also filters for reference type. So you can see how to organize your information. You can also create another field that says reference subject. So you have a good way to organize your information with nTask in this separate reference workspace. Lastly, if you want to reflect on your progress, you can go to the left bottom corner and select activity log. Although frankly, I don't really think you will use this. As you can see, it is very operational, very cold. It doesn't really have a meaning. It just logs what kind of changes you've made in your system, like the PDF reference type fields we created just now, tasks we've added to the system. So take it with a grain of salt. All in all, a decent system with some significant shortcomings. However, dependencies are on the way. They've teased this feature. It's not available yet. That's going to be a big one because it's pretty rare to see, even though it's 2022. Surprisingly, dependencies is a functionality that seems to be pretty difficult for some software to implement. Do you use nTask? Would you consider using it? Leave your comments down below. Happy to answer any questions, and I'll see you in the next video.